Criteria for success. What is criteria for success? In authentic assessment, students demonstrate their abilities, skills, or what they know. Their success will be dependent on where they are in the learning process and how well they performed. Outcomes describe where students are expected to be at the end of their learning. Assessment tools, such as rubrics, detail and describe pieces of the outcome and often describe benchmarks along the way. Exams are often used to measure knowledge. Whether a rubric or an exam is used, the measurement tool for assessment will result in a number or some sort of score, or perhaps multiple scores. Criteria for success identifies two things. The first off is the score. The criteria for success identifies the score or value that is considered successful in regard to where a student is in their learning. So to answer this question, you're asking, what value on the assessment tool, the rubric or the exam, does each student need to reach in order to be considered successful in meeting the expectations of the outcome? Which score? Well, typically assessments are going to produce multiple scores, whether this be rows on a rubric or individual exam questions. You might be wondering which to use. You have two options. You can either create a criteria for success for the overall value or set criteria for success for individual components as appropriate. The second part of criteria for success is the quantity of students. How many students, generally expressed as a percentage, are expected to reach that score or benchmark that you have set? Typically, we do not expect 100% of our students to reach that, as it's just not realistic. We're looking at one point in their entire learning experience, and students might have not done well on that particular exam. And if you have a small group of students, the criteria for success also should be dependent on the types of values that you could get in the percentages. Let me explain a little bit more. Determining appropriate values can be tricky. Initial criteria sometimes feel arbitrary. To make them feel less so, consider the individual components being assessed, which have the greatest importance and which are more flexible. This goes into the multiple scores on the scoring criteria. When using a rubric or scoring criteria, that gives you more rationale than a grade for students and for assessment purposes. When looking at percentages, the second component, consider your population. You can't expect 90% of your students to reach a goal if you only have 5 students. One student being off the mark is automatically going to put you at 80%. If you're still uncertain about your values, which are appropriate, test them and adjust them as needed.